Do you ever smile, sir? Asked the little girl in the coffee shop. The man she spoke to, a CEO lost in his own world. Didn't expect that she would change his life forever. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Rain tapped softly against the windows of a quiet cafe in downtown Chicago. The sky was heavy and gray, the kind of morning that made the whole city move a little slower. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of roasted coffee and rain-soaked pavement. At a corner table sat a man, Ethan Vale. The name carried weight in boardrooms and headlines, in whispered conversations about success. But here, he was just another face behind a cup of black coffee. Every morning, same time, same table, same order. The barista didn't even ask anymore. Double espresso. No sugar. He liked things that way. Predictable. Controlled. Quiet. His laptop was open, numbers and reports glowing on the screen, but his eyes weren't really reading. They hadn't been, not for a long time. 3 years ago, his wife's car never made it through an intersection. Since then, he'd mastered the art of existing without living. He still showed up to meetings, still smiled for cameras when he had to, still signed contracts that made other people rich. But inside, there was only the hum of emptiness. Steady, familiar, safe. He took a sip of his coffee. It was bitter, sharp, unfeeling, just the way he liked it. Outside, the city kept moving. People rushed past the window, umbrellas colliding, puddles splashing. Life carried on, and Ethan Vale sat in his corner, untouched by it all. He wasn't cold, just gone. The kind of gone that doesn't make noise. The kind that wears a pressed suit and a steady gaze and convinces the world he's fine. There was a time when laughter used to fill his mornings, when there were 2 cups on the table instead of 1. But that time lived only in photographs now. The coffee machine hissed in the distance. Someone laughed near the counter. Somewhere, a door opened and closed. The world kept breathing around him, unaware that he'd stopped long ago. Sometimes the loneliest places aren't empty rooms, but crowded cafes. Sometimes a man can be surrounded by people and still disappear behind silence. Ethan stared at the swirl of steam rising from his cup, lost in the quiet rhythm of rain against glass. And then, just when the world seemed content to leave him untouched, a small voice broke through the stillness. Do you ever smile, sir? And with that one question, everything began to change. Ethan looked up. The voice was small, curious, and completely out of place in his world of quiet routines and spreadsheets. Standing beside his table was a little girl, maybe 5, maybe 6, hair tied in a messy ponytail, rain still dripping from the ends. She wore a pink sweater 2 sizes too big and sneakers that looked like a rainbow had exploded on them. In her tiny hands, she clutched a half-finished coloring book. She tilted her head, studying him with eyes far too bright for such a gray morning. Do you ever smile, sir? She asked again. For a second, the entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. The question was so simple, so innocent, and yet it cut through the air like a whisper that knew exactly where to land. Before he could answer, a woman rushed over, hair damp from the rain, apron tied loosely around her waist. Her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, she said quickly, crouching beside the girl. Lily, honey, you can't just talk to people like that. The little girl frowned, but he looked sad. Ethan straightened slightly, clearing his throat. It's fine, he said, his voice calm, distant, the kind of tone that built walls instead of bridges. The woman nodded, offering a polite, nervous smile before guiding the child away. Come on, let's go color by the window, okay? Lily hesitated, still looking back at him as she walked away. Her eyes, curious, unfiltered, honest, lingered for a heartbeat longer than comfort allowed. And just like that, she was gone. Ethan stared at the place where she'd stood, the faint sound of crayons scraping paper now replacing her voice. He tried to go back to his laptop, to the familiar hum of numbers and meaningless meetings. But he couldn't. That one question, so gentle, so unassuming, kept echoing in his mind. Do you ever smile, sir? It wasn't the question itself that unsettled him. It was the way she'd asked it. The way she'd said, sir, not with fear or politeness, but with genuine curiosity, as if she truly wanted to know. He sat back, watching her in the reflection of the window. She was laughing now, coloring something only she could see, completely untouched by the heaviness that filled the world around her. For a moment, he wondered what that felt like, to laugh without reason, to smile without effort. He couldn't remember. The rain outside grew softer, blurring the edges of the city beyond the glass. And though the cafe was full of people, the only sound that stayed with him was that little girl's voice. Sweet, innocent, and impossible to forget. Do you ever smile, sir? He took another sip of his coffee. It was colder now, bitter as always, but somehow it didn't taste the same. The next morning, Ethan came back to the cafe. Same table, same coffee, same silence. But something felt different. He couldn't explain it, only that the quiet didn't feel as comfortable as it used to. It felt heavier, like an echo waiting for an answer. He opened his laptop, scrolled through unread emails, signed a few documents. Everything exactly as it should be. And yet, when the door opened and the small chime rang through the room, his eyes lifted, almost on instinct. There she was, the little girl from yesterday. Pink sweater, coloring book, that same bounce in her step that didn't seem to care the world was gray outside. She noticed him instantly, and before her mother could say a word, she waved, a small, unapologetic wave that made a few customers turn and smile. He didn't wave back, but he didn't look away either. A few minutes later, as Maya, that was her name, he learned it from her name tag, handed him his coffee. Ethan caught the sound of crayons scraping against paper again. Lily was sitting by the window, humming softly to herself. It was oddly comforting. Day after day, it continued. Every morning, the same rhythm, rain, coffee, silence, and Lily. Sometimes she'd glance over a coloring book and say something out of the blue. Why don't you ever laugh? He'd blink, caught off guard, and mutter, not much to laugh about. She'd think about that for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then she'd grin and say, maybe you're just not looking hard enough. Another day, she asked, do you have friends? Ethan hesitated. I have colleagues. That's not the same, she said quickly without looking up. Friends make you smile. Colleagues make you work. Her words shouldn't have mattered. She was a child. But somehow, they stayed with him long after he'd left. Then one morning, he walked in and found something on his table. A small paper cup, drawn in blue marker, a big, lopsided smiley face. No name, no note, just that crooked little smile staring back at him. He looked over to the window. Lily was pretending not to watch, her crayons moving furiously across a page. When he caught her eye, she froze and grinned. You look like you needed one, she said softly. Ethan didn't know what to say. He stared at the cup for a long time, fingers tracing the ink where it bled into the cardboard. Something in his chest shifted, just slightly, but enough to feel. And for the first time in years, he smiled. It wasn't big. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The rain outside had started again, gentle and steady, tapping against the windows like a heartbeat. And somehow, that cafe, that ordinary little corner of the city, didn't feel as lonely anymore, because sometimes it doesn't take grand gestures to bring someone back to life. Sometimes it just takes a small voice, a paper cup, and a smile drawn in blue. Days turned into weeks. And what started as quiet encounters slowly became something softer. Ethan still came to cafe every morning. Same table, same coffee. But now, it wasn't the silence he came for. It was the laughter, the hum of a small girl's imagination filling the air like sunlight after rain. Sometimes, Lily would hand him her drawings, colorful, messy, and full of life. Which one's your favorite? She'd ask. He'd study them carefully, pretending to choose, though the truth was he loved them all. Because every line she drew felt like something he'd forgotten. Joy without reason. One morning, as he waited for his order, he noticed Maya behind the counter. Her hair tied back, a smear of paint still visible on her wrist. He'd never really looked at her before. Now, he found himself watching the way she moved, Quick, graceful, trying to do everything at once. When she brought his coffee over, he nodded to the paint stain on her hand. Not many baristas paint before work. She smiled a little shyly. Old habit. I studied art once. Thought I'd teach kids, maybe start an art studio one day. Life had other plans. Her voice held warmth, but also something fragile, the kind of strength that comes after losing too much. He hesitated, then asked, "What happened?" Maya looked down to counter, her fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "My husband passed away 2 years ago. Things got hard, so I work here for now. It's not forever, just a step." Ethan wanted to say something, but the words caught somewhere between sympathy and silence. Instead, he just nodded, not as a CEO, not as a customer, but as someone who understood loss. That morning, he stayed a little longer after finishing his coffee. He watched Lily doodle on napkins, Maya wiping tables, the two of them sharing small smiles between chaos and spilled sugar. Something about that scene stayed with him. Over the next few days, he found himself listening more, not to numbers in his emails, but to stories about Maya's dream of teaching again, about Lily's favorite crayons, about the way they found happiness in places that had nothing to do with money or success. He realized how quiet his world had become and how much sound he'd been missing. One morning, Maya stopped by his table again. "You know," she said lightly, "for a man who doesn't smile much, you've been sitting here an awful lot lately." He smirked faintly. "Maybe your coffee's getting better." She laughed, shaking her head. "Nice try. It's not the coffee." And for a moment, just a moment, the air between them changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable, familiar. Ethan left that day without finishing his drink. But as he walked out into the drizzle, he realized something unusual. The rain didn't feel cold anymore. Maybe he thought it wasn't the world that had lost its color. Maybe he just hadn't been looking closely enough. Because sometimes connection doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it starts quietly, with a conversation, a shared laugh, and the warmth of a cup held between two tired hands. One morning, Ethan arrived at the cafe later than usual. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening in soft morning light. He walked in, tired but somehow lighter than usual, and noticed Maya behind the counter, moving with her usual energy. She caught his eye and, without a word, brought his coffee over herself. No rush, no barista etiquette, just her, standing there with a quiet smile. "You ever try it with sugar?" she asked, tilting her head, a playful glint in her eyes. Ethan frowned, glancing at the cup. "I don't like sweet things," he said. "Maybe that's a problem," she teased, leaning slightly on the counter. He looked up, startled by the gentle humor. It had been so long since anyone had tried to tease him. Then, almost without realizing it, a laugh escaped him. Soft, hesitant, like a door opening after years of being locked. Maya smiled wider. "There it is," she said softly, as if she'd been waiting for that sound all along. The café felt different that morning. The hum of machines and chatter in the background seemed warmer somehow, as if it had been waiting for a crack in his armor. Lily was nearby, coloring with intense concentration, and looked up just in time to see him smile. Her little face lit up. "See? Told you." Ethan felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just a smile. It was recognition. That laughter could exist even in quiet gray mornings. That life didn't always have to be measured in reports and deadlines. He sipped his coffee, this time noticing the subtle richness he had never allowed himself to taste. Maya leaned slightly closer, her eyes warm, and for the first time, it didn't feel awkward to simply be near someone. The moment was small, almost insignificant. But sometimes it's the smallest things, a cup of coffee, a playful question, a shared laugh, that remind you life is still waiting to be felt. And that morning, for the first time in years, Ethan Vale felt alive. Not everyone noticed a change in Ethan Vale. One afternoon, his phone rang while he sat in his office, staring at spreadsheets he barely remembered opening. The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. "Ethan, we need to talk about these donations," said a board member. You're running a company, not a charity. We can't afford sentiment. He held the phone, letting the words hang in the air. For a moment, the laughter, the small smiles, the warmth he begun to feel, it all seemed out of place. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply hung up. Silence filled the room, heavier than any meeting he had ever attended. That night, he found himself walking past the cafe, the windows dark and empty. Rain began to fall, soft and steady, reminding him that the world he built demanded control, order, and detachment. And for the first time in weeks, the comfort he had discovered felt fragile, almost forbidden, as if happiness itself was a risk. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the cafe, expecting the usual chatter and warmth. But the lights were off, the chairs stacked, and the door locked. His phone rang moments later. It was a manager, her voice tight and shaking. Maya's apartment had caught fire. She and Lily were safe, she said, but they had lost everything. Their home, their belongings, even the little comforts that made life bearable. Ethan didn't pause to think. He grabbed his coat and drove through the city, the rain pouring down in relentless sheets. The windshield blurred with water, the streets glistening like liquid silver. But he didn't slow down. He didn't care about traffic, about schedules, about work. All that mattered was reaching them. When he arrived at the shelter, he found Maya sitting on a cot, holding Lily tightly. The little girl's favorite teddy bear was half-charred, but her eyes still sparkled, fierce and bright despite the smoke and soot. Ethan knelt beside them, careful not to startle them. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. "You're still smiling." Lily shrugged, a small, stubborn grin on her face. "Someone has to." Maya looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "I'm glad I did." For hours, they sat together, letting the storm outside mirror the chaos inside. Ethan didn't check his phone. He didn't think about work. He didn't plan. He simply stayed, holding space for their grief, their fear, their exhaustion. And somewhere in that quiet, messy room, something began to shift. The walls Ethan had built around his heart softened. The grief he had carried alone for so long found another rhythm. Not of isolation, but of shared strength. By the time the rain eased, Ethan understood something he hadn't felt in years. True care doesn't announce itself in grand gestures or headlines. It shows up in the small, desperate, human moments, in holding a hand, sharing a blanket, and staying when the world has turned its back. That night, for the first time in years, Ethan didn't leave. He stayed with them, not as a CEO, but as a man finally remembering how to be gentle. Weeks turned into months, and life began to bloom in ways Ethan had never expected. He didn't just visit the cafe anymore. He became part of their world, quietly without fanfare. Every morning, he stayed longer, sharing small moments of laughter and conversation, learning to listen not to numbers or reports, but to stories. Stories of resilience, of hope, of small joys that the world often overlooks. One day, he made a decision, not a business decision, not one that would be announced in headlines or meetings. This was personal, a chance to do something meaningful. He converted one unused floor of his tech firm into a children's art therapy center, and he asked Maya to be its creative director. She hesitated at first, her eyes wide, disbelief and gratitude mixing in a way he had never seen. "I don't need a check," he said softly. "I just want to help you do what you've always dreamed of." The center opened quietly, without cameras or press. But the life inside it was immediate and vivid. Laughter filled the rooms that had once been silent. Tiny hands smeared paint across canvases. Crayons rolled across tables, leaving trails of color. Walls bloomed with suns, rainbows, and crooked, smiley faces, echoing the first one Lily had given him. Ethan watched in the doorway, unnoticed. He saw Maya guiding a small group of children, her hair falling over her face as she leaned to help them. He saw Lily dancing around with paint on her fingers, laughing without care. And for the first time in years, he didn't see loss or sorrow. He saw life, bright, messy, and unstoppable. It wasn't about the press calling it a brilliant PR move, or the board members nodding in approval. It was about something far deeper. Redemption. Not for anyone else, but for himself. Redemption for the years he had spent numb. for the walls he had built around his heart, for the part of him that had stopped believing joy could exist. Sometimes, he found himself holding a brush, joining the children in their messy art. Paint splattered across his shirt, across his hands, and for a moment, it didn't matter that he was a CEO. He was just a man learning to live again. The center became more than a project. It became a home, a place of healing. For Maya, for Lily, for the children, and even for Ethan. And in that quiet, colorful space, he realized something profound. Happiness doesn't arrive with grand gestures. It arrives in small, steady acts, in smiles, in shared laughter, in the courage to care. And slowly, day by day, life returned to him. Bright, loud, messy, and beautiful. A year had passed. The once-in-use floor of Ethan's tech firm had been transformed into a vibrant children's art center. The walls were alive with color. Bright suns, sprawling rainbows, crooked smiley faces, and every chaotic masterpiece a child's imagination could create. The faint aroma of paint mixed with crayons and the occasional hint of coffee from a small corner cafe tucked inside the center. Ethan walked in, sleeves rolled up, a shirt splattered with paint, hands streaked with color from earlier projects. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a man rediscovered what it meant to live, to feel, to be present. Children's laughter echoed through the halls. Tiny feet shuffled across the floors. Chairs scraped lightly, and brushes dipped in paint created a symphony of messy, joyful chaos. The world outside, with its deadlines and spreadsheets, felt a million miles away. Lily looked up from her sketchbook, her small face breaking into a grin as wide as the sun she had painted on the wall. "You smile a lot now, mister," she said, her voice bubbling with delight. Ethan chuckled, warmth spreading through him like sunlight. "I had a good teacher," he replied, nodding toward her. Maya moved gracefully among the children, guiding them gently, her voice soft and encouraging. She paused for a moment, catching Ethan's eyes, and offered him a smile, one filled with quiet pride and shared understanding. "You still take your coffee black?" she teased, a playful glint in her eyes. Ethan lifted a cup from a small table nearby. 2 sugars this time, a crooked grin tugging at his lips. "Not anymore," he said. He walked through the room, observing the children as they painted, laughed, and shared their creations. Some painted with reckless abandon. Others focused intently, while a few whispered quietly to one another about the stories their pictures told. Everywhere he looked, there was life, messy, colorful, and unapologetically real. And as he watched Maya kneel beside a small girl, her hair falling gently over her face while she guided the child's brush, Ethan felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. He realized that this wasn't just an art center. It was a sanctuary, not just for children, but for himself as well. A place where laughter could heal, where creativity could mend hearts, where second chances weren't a concept, but a lived reality. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about the weight of his responsibilities, the pressure of decisions, or the emptiness of routine. He was here, fully here. And then a small voice called out, "Come paint with us, mister." Lily waved her brush at him, her eyes sparkling. Ethan smiled wide, full, and unrestrained. He grabbed a brush, dipped into paint, and joined them. The colors smeared across the paper, across his hands, across his heart. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and gentle. The world glistened under the light. But inside, life blazed in every corner, every laugh, every stroke of paint. And in that messy, beautiful chaos, Ethan Vale finally understood what it meant to truly live again. Happiness wasn't something to chase. It wasn't a destination. It was right here, in moments like this, messy, bright, full of color, and shared with those who mattered most. And finally, for the first time in many years, he smiled, freely, fully, and without reservation. Sometimes, the smallest voices ask the biggest questions. A question as simple as, "Do you ever smile, sir?" can ripple through a life like a pebble dropped into still water, creating waves we never expected. Life doesn't always arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a smile across a coffee cup, in the laughter of a child, or in the courage to care when the world has taught you not to. Ethan Vale's story reminds us that redemption isn't something you earn with power or money. It's something you discover in the small, Human moments. Moments that require nothing more than presence, compassion, and a willingness to open your heart. So, take a moment today. Notice the people around you. Listen, smile, offer kindness without expectation. Because sometimes that's all it takes to change a life. And maybe, just maybe, someone will do the same for you. Life is messy. Life is unpredictable. But life is also beautiful, especially when we choose to see it, feel it, and share it. Remember, a smile is never wasted. A small act of kindness can echo farther than we ever imagine. And in the end, it's the little things, the questions, the smiles, the shared moments that make all the difference. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV, where love, hope, and second chances still exist.